Okay, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining this online talk. So my name is Lise Jaillant. I'm an associate professor in digital humanities at Loughborough University in the UK, and I'm also the principal investigator for the LUSTRE project. So LUSTRE, for those of you who don't know the project already, the full title is Unlocking Our Digital Past with Artificial Intelligence. So, of course, we are interested in AI, we are interested in digital records, we are particularly interested in government records. So we have a series of project partners. We are working very closely with the Cabinet Office, with PRONI, with other project partners. And of course, we are very grateful to them for their support. So we are organizing a series of events, and our next event is going to be a workshop on the 4th of May. So we are going to advertise this workshop very soon. So keep an eye on our announcements. I think if you're interested in the LUSTRE project, probably the best way to keep updated is to join our mailing list. We have a listserv. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. Hopefully you have access to the chat on your side. Okay, so this is a link to join the mailing list and to receive, regular updates about the project. So I hope you will join us if you're not a member already. And just to tell you a little bit about the format for this talk, so we are going to have a talk by Rob Bass. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us today. And we will keep the questions for towards the end. Okay, so we will have the presentation first, and then some time for questions and answers towards the end of this talk. So Rob Bass is a digital director at the Information and Records Management Society, and the title of his talk today is Information Governance AI in Microsoft 365. So again, thank you so much, Rob, for joining us today, and I will hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for the invites. And, I'm really, and thank you for everyone spending their lunch break listening to me. So, yeah, as you rightly say, I'm talking today about information governance AI in Microsoft 365. And I just want to say before I jump too far into the conversation, I'm not an AI expert. I'm very much coming at this from having a good understanding of Microsoft 365 and also understanding information governance as well. Now, for people who don't know me, as you rightly just mentioned, I happen to be Digital Director of the Information and Records Management Society. In my day job, I'm also the Knowledge and Information Management Practice Lead for a company called Intelogy, because really I'm a Microsoft 365 solution architect. I've come up the development line, if you like, as a technologist, but I'm trying to have one foot clearly in both camps so that I'm very much straddling the divide between information management and governance and also information I guess IT services, and try and bring them together, because I feel very often that divide's a bit too artificially imposed. Anyway, reach out and contact me if there's any questions that anyone happens to have. Now, I'm sure some of you are sat there wondering, hang on a minute, I've joined a conversation about AI and I'm now looking at some stone tools. Why on earth am I looking at a whole bunch of stone tools on the screen? AI is meant to have, cliched stock images of robots and, a brain in, blue electronic sort of graphics. Why, what on earth are stone tools got to do with anything? And the answer to the question is, I actually used this image, these tools, 3 years ago. It was just over 3 years ago, in a face-to-face session back in Bracknell. It was about a month before lockdown started, actually. So, it shows the time and place. But it had a whole room full of people, and this was my closing punchline on a conversation. You see, Microsoft had just released and was just in the process of releasing some brand new tools, which I'm going to discuss later on today, around AI. And I guess I put these stone tools up as a bit of a cynical sort of punchline, a joke at the end of my presentation. You see, what I did is when you upload an image into Microsoft 365, it suggests alt text for you. There's some image recognition AI behind the scenes there that look at the image and say, oh, what does this image look like? And of course, I made the joke to the room, what do you think the suggested alt text was that was recommended by Microsoft's AI. And I got some really good suggestions from people in the room. Someone said shark's teeth, I think, and someone else suggested surfboards. And of course, I got a slight ripple of laughter when I actually put up the suggested alt text banner, a bunch of hot dogs. I've no idea what the AI was thinking when it came to that conclusion. And then just to extend it a little bit further, what I did in that presentation is then change the background color of these this image and uploaded it again into Microsoft 365 just to see what the alt text would do. And as you can probably see, it gave me another quite, silly answer, but it makes sense, I guess. I have no idea why it's now only suggesting there's one hot dog in the image, but who knows? So why on earth am I discussing this? Well, I guess I'm not sure I would be so cynical now. This punchline from 3 years ago feels like the sort of punchline that I would always add into, a slide deck when I was talking about AI. But I'm not sure that I think progress over the last 3 years and certainly over the last 6 months, where AI is clearly making a visible impact. And I think we can all see the highly effective nature of what it promises. I'm not sure that this sort of level of cynicism would really go down so well anymore. I'm not sure I'm that confident to be this cynical, shall I say. Now, I remember just over 20 years ago, just to age me, I was at university in Sheffield, and one of my lecturers, Professor Noel Sharkey, who some of you might be familiar with, he's an expert in machine learning, natural language, and especially robotics as well. In fact, he went on to become one of the judges at on the TV program Robot Wars. But anyway, Noel, fascinating chap, really good lecturer, really interesting person to listen to. He, I guess, the way he spoke about AI was as a current thing, and this was 20 years ago, saying it's here, it's now, it's with us. And yet to me, it always felt, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, oh, it's just around the corner. But if you'd asked me 10 years ago, oh, yeah, it's just around the corner. Even 3 years ago when I was on that stage in Bracknell, oh, it's just around the corner. And I'm not sure it's just around the corner anymore. It feels like it's almost here and now. Now I'm going to break the cardinal sin of any form of presentation here and reference a YouTube video. I know, it's possibly a step below referencing Wikipedia, but I'm going, this chap here, I'm not going to recommend, everyone goes and sees Tom Scott's videos. He's already got millions of subscribers online. He doesn't need more money from people coming along and watching his videos, but I have put a QR code up in the top corner if anyone does want to watch this video. The reason I've put this together is he put a fascinating little video together about a month ago when I was thinking through what I was going to speak to today around how he'd used the ChatGPT service, OpenAI's revolutionary technology that I guess everyone's seen far too much conversation around over the last 6 months. I think it was almost the vogue for everyone to come up with a silly challenge for ChatGPT to overcome in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet or whatever. Well, Tom here wanted to write some code. In this video, he's wanting to get ChatGPT to help him by writing a bit of code. And what he does is, the code comes back wrong. Tom's formerly been a developer, no idea what he developed in, but he looked at the code, he recognized the mistake, he was able to ask a more sensible question. The ChatGPT service came back with an improved version of that code. But really, the point I wanted to make was around this curve that Tom has on the screen, the S, this sigmoid curve that he starts referencing. Because, of course, whenever there is a new technology, you don't know quite what impact that technology is going to have until you're able to look back on it. But we do know that there's multiple, whenever there is a new technology, there's going to be a ripple of further technologies that is substantially pick up on and build upon that technology and start changing the nature of how we use it and can fundamentally restructure society. And we've all, well, I imagine most of us, there might be a few younger people on this call, but most of us have lived through one of these sigmoid curves already when the internet came along. sure, in the mid-90s, it wasn't having that much of an impact initially on our lives, but 5 years on, it became a very dominant force. And certainly now it's hard to imagine, a world without the internet almost. It's become a crux that we rely on. It's fundamentally reshaped society and the economy. And I guess what Tom's saying in this video is, where on this sigmoid curve are we? Are we right up at this end? Is this where ChatGPT is? Has AI blossomed? Is this the final product? Are we effectively getting ourselves into a situation where AI is providing us with a substantially beneficial tool that can massively increase efficiency across workplaces? Or are we perhaps much earlier in the curve? Are we down here somewhere? Is ChatGPT and DALL-E and all of the other AIs that we started seeing coming out, are they still very much at the lower end of the curve? Are we about to have a big revolution that who knows where it takes us? Anyway, feel free to watch that video. I found it a fascinating little soundbite. I don't know where we are on that curve, but we're not here to talk about this. We're here to talk about Microsoft 365. Let's dive in. So, underpinning absolutely all of the AI that Microsoft has is Azure Cognitive Services. Now, Azure Cognitive Services, really what happened was Microsoft recognized that they needed AI all over the place. It was a big thing that you could imagine different teams across the whole of their product suite, from their database team to their Dynamics team. Everyone needed a bit of AI. It was something that's going to, change almost all facets of every product going forwards. So what they decided to do was bundle together all of their leading experts into one central team, Azure Cognitive Services. And instead of building AIs to solve specific problems, they built a whole suite of AI services that anyone can tap into to solve standard sort of generic problems that everyone needs to extend. So, for example, these are some of the AI services provided within Azure Cognitive Services. But any one of us here could build our own application, let's say, that takes advantage of Microsoft's sentiment analysis and starts, I don't know, looking at the review comments off of Amazon and starting to work out which ones are positive and which ones are negative. But we've got that ability, but also Microsoft has that ability as well. So when other teams in Microsoft want to build AI into their applications, they actually go back to Azure Cognitive Services and start leveraging their own public-facing APIs. So almost all of the AI that we're seeing surfacing into Microsoft 365 is based upon Azure Cognitive Services. What's happening is one team in Redmond is then building a product that's entirely based upon Azure Cognitive Services under the seams. And certainly that's what we're seeing with everything I'm going to be talking about today. And again, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert at Azure Cognitive Services. I'd love to have the time to spend doing this, but I struggle to keep up with the information governance side of things, let alone think about all of the underpinning AI. So let's give you some examples of how that AI has started appearing inside Microsoft 365 from a governance perspective. The first example I want to discuss is the concept of a trainable classifier. Now, really the problem that Microsoft is trying to solve with a trainable classifier is the problem that I'll call the digital heap. Certainly this is a phrase that's been going round recently, certainly in the UK public sector. The digital heap is what most organizations seem to have. It's the gigabytes, it's the sometimes petabytes of information that people have where it's unstructured. There's a limited metadata, there's a limited retention, that effectively, there's content in there that you need to keep and it's higher value. But there's so much information there that finding it, sorting it out is almost impossible. And trainable classifiers are one of the capabilities that Microsoft's introduced to try and start helping organizations unpick that giant heap. You see, what it's doing is it's looking across all of that information and trying to use AI to find content that seems to be of the same type so that you can then automatically classify that content. And you can automatically use trainable classifiers to apply sensitivity labels, retention labels, or communications compliance policies to the content that you find through a trainable classifier. So it can be a really powerful tool from an information governance perspective. So how does it work? Well, what you do is you need to get together a seed set of information. And really, this seed set needs to be content that's all of the same type. It needs to be representative examples of the same type of content. And you need a minimum of 50 files here. It can be up to a maximum of 500 for this seed set, but minimum of 50 files. The more, typically, the better the trainable classifier is at learning from your seed set. And once you put together the seed, the next stage is the trainable classifier needs to have a training set to work against. Now, for that training set, you need a minimum of 200 items. Some of them are of the same type of content, and some of them you intentionally have to put in false, different types of content. It can be, but at minimum 200 items. It could be up to 10,000 items in this training set. Now, you can imagine the AI is, all it's done is looked at the seed set, tried to learn what this type of content looks like. Let's call it a policy, let's say. It's tried to learn what a policy looks like in your organization. And when it's looking at this training set, it's going to try and find everything it thinks is a policy, and it's going to stamp it and say, yeah, I'm going to suggest these ones look like policies to me. And this is where Microsoft, I guess, has started shortcutting machine learning. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Microsoft's concept of machine teaching, but it's certainly something that Microsoft has been promoting heavily over the last few years, where to supplement this machine learning, there's a lot of human intervention to try and teach the AI and direct it. So it's not just sort of blindly building algorithms in every direction. It's almost harnessing, it's focusing those algorithms on the outcomes that you're looking for. So what Microsoft's doing is there's a review stage where you then look at the training set and you tell the AI, yes, you got that one right, you got that one right, no, you got this one wrong. And I think it's for every 30 items you mark, it improves the accuracy of that AI. So it's learning, if you like, from your marking of the outcomes of the classifier. And it's only after you've done this review that you're ready then to publish this across all of the rest of your content. You can probably imagine this is a really powerful tool, but it's quite niche in its application, because you've got to build a different trainable classifier for each type of content. And for most organizations, you also need a large volume of sample content of that type of content. So you need scenarios where you've got an awful lot of it that's not well classified, that's not well defined, that's in a big heap, scattered with other types of content. But you also need to have, you need to have, I don't know, you need to almost be able to build the models for each of those types. So I don't know, it's very difficult to actually find scenarios where organizations have sufficient volumes of the same type of content that they don't already know is of a given type of content. So while it's a really useful tool, and I'm sure some of you on this call will have already used trainable classifiers, it's not something I've really used in anger that many times. It's very much, for me, a niche application that when you find a utility for it is really powerful. But in most scenarios, I think most of the organizations I work with have large numbers of different types of content, and often don't have enough consistency around their types of content to be able to really use trainable classifiers, certainly en masse. Anyway, useful to know that it's there. The next set of capabilities I want to look at is Microsoft Syntax. Now, Microsoft Syntax has started to pick up traction, is being used more and more by different organizations in different scenarios. But fundamentally, it's a use of AI to extract metadata from content of the same type. So before September, Microsoft Syntax used to be called SharePoint Syntax, and I'm sure some of you might be familiar with it under that guise. Now, SharePoint Syntax, or should we say now Microsoft Syntax, what it's doing is there's various different models that you can use to build and the extraction of metadata from. So let's take you through a couple of those. The first, and probably in my mind one of the more powerful ones, is what Microsoft is currently calling unstructured document processing. Now, until a few months ago, this was called document understanding. So for anyone who's already familiar with Microsoft syntax, this is the new name for document understanding. Now, I'm not sure I fully agree with the name. You see, the word unstructured, I think, is a little bit misleading. Let me try and explain. What you're doing here in the unstructured document processing model is, first, you've got to create, a bit like with the trainable classifier, you've got to create a model for each type of content that you want to try and extract metadata from. Now, with unstructured document processing, you've got two main sort of concepts. What you're doing is you're creating classifiers, which are ways of trying to identify that the type of content is of the right type of content. You know, it matching, if you like, yes, it is a policy. And these typically are keywords. So it's could be, say, specific sort of data types like dates, and the proximity between, say, a keyword string and a date, or a keyword string and, say, a credit card number. So you can build up these classifiers to try and help positively identify the type of content that you're looking for. But it's down to you as a human, if you like, to think about the scenarios of how you're building those classifiers appropriately, so that you're reducing the number of false positives when the AI takes over and actually runs against your content. There's a lot here, more so than trainable classifiers. There's even more emphasis upon the user thinking about how they're defining the model. You also have the second concept is something called an extractor, which is capturing the metadata from inside the content. And really, you're looking at the phrases and also the patterns of characters again, and you're using it this time to try and identify the unique bit of metadata buried inside the content that you're trying to extract. In this case, in this fuzzy image that I've got here, you can see there's a company name that you're trying to extract, Best for You Organics. And it's hard to, effectively finding a phrase like that is quite difficult, because especially where it doesn't look like a company name, it's a series of words. You'd have to find a consistent way of identifying that phrase. And very often it's going to be using words like when it's directly after the word between. But of course, if you're starting to thread the model together at that level of accuracy, saying look for a phrase after the word between, before the word of, you're starting to really need consistency around the structure of the file. So I question the word unstructured in the naming of the unstructured document processing model. For me, I think mostly structured would be a way of looking. I mean, the way that you're building the model, it doesn't matter if this is on page 1 or page 100 of the file, but it's still, you need a fair amount of consistency in the actual structure of the file to be able to make much use of the model. It's incredibly powerful, but it needs a lot of human sort of setup and thinking and testing, especially where your types of content potentially step on each other's toes and might have overlap. So at the moment, it supports unstructured document processing, supports a wide range of different types of files, all the Office files, PDFs, emails, images like JPEGs, PNGs, HTML files, text files, lots of different things. And one of the, because it's so manually set up, each model, because you go through this process of tagging exactly what you're looking for inside the file to extract, you only set up 5, the training set is 5 positive, minimum this is, 5 positive examples of this type of file and 1 negative example. And I guess one of the main benefits of this is, in addition to identifying the type of content, it only will extract metadata if it's positively matched. So if it's really good, because you can unleash it across your tenant, and if there are different types of content, it's not going to try and extract the metadata from those as well. It's only going to try and extract the metadata from files that it says, yeah, this is a policy. And likewise, you can get it to classify, a bit like trainable classifiers. So you could get it to tag with a sensitivity label or a retention label, so you can start marking that content as well. And actually, this is something that I've always wanted to put into an experiment. I've never had time or to set up this, but and I think it'd be quite hard to simulate. But trying to find a way of testing whether the unstructured document processing model provided by Microsoft Syntex provides more accuracy when it comes to classification than the trainable classifiers that we just looked at, because I genuinely don't know which of the two models would produce better results. The trainable classifiers is obviously leveraging the AI more to do most of the identification, whereas the unstructured document processing is much more reliant on the human application of the model, but both reliant on the AI to identify content that matches that model. Anyway, that's an aside. I think it's a very powerful thing, and certainly at work we've been using this in various different scenarios to capture information from a whole bunch of different types of content. For example, blueprints that perhaps were created, physically created and have been stored physically for a long time that have just been scanned in. We're using it to extract metadata from that sort of information in order to be able to correctly identify, tag, and classify the content, as well as extract metadata from it. So moving on to the next of these models that Microsoft Syntex provides. This, again, has been through a recent rebranding, and it's, again, a name that I'm not so hot on myself, but Microsoft's calling this the structured document processing. It used to be called forms processing, for anyone who's familiar with the older names. Now, this works in a different ways. It's actually using a slightly different technology underneath it called AI Builder. But really, with forms processing, excuse the fuzzy image, by the way, with forms processing or structured document processing, what it's doing is you define zones, if you like, areas on the file that you're processing, and then the model will go to that zone and try and extract the metadata from the zone. So it's very much an area-based model. Now, the reason I question the name structured document processing, I agree entirely with structured, because you're zoning out the page, if you like, and drawing these green boxes around to say, look for the metadata you want to find here, it's very reliant on incredibly structured files. You need the same file over and over and over again to be the same format. So I'd say this is, rigid files as opposed to structured. But the word I've got a problem with is document. You see, one of the things the structured document processing model doesn't support yet is documents. It only actually currently processes PDFs and JPEGs and PNGs. You see, it's just images and PDFs. So really, when you're starting to think through the processes here, it tends to be the case that these images and PDFs, if you're going to be trying to extract metadata from them, the chances are these are images and PDFs that you didn't create as an organization. It might be some examples where they are information that's come from a different system, but typically you would already have the metadata. If, let's say, this is a form or come as an export from a database or something that you control, you'd be able to find a different way of classifying this information at the point the image was created. Typically these are coming into your organization from outside. And the perfect example is invoices and purchase orders, the example that Microsoft gives, and where you'd be able to automate the process of using effectively the OCR that's underpinning structured document processing to be able to extract metadata from the correct zones. Now, just a slight word of warning here. With the structured document processing side of things, what you can't do is identify the type of content. So if you put any images or PDFs into a library that you've set this model up on, it's going to automatically just try and extract metadata from them, regardless of whether, it is of the same content type. So just be careful with that, because really you need to have identified yourself that, yes, it's an invoice before you put it into a library, let's say, where you've set up this model to extract information from invoices, because otherwise it's just going to try and process it regardless. And also, because it doesn't have the ability to identify the type of content, it also it doesn't have any way of classifying that content. Unlike the unstructured document processing, which will say, yes, this is a policy, I will tag it therefore with this retention label. structured document processing doesn't have the ability to classify. Now, the third of these models, Freeform, came out just before Christmas. And I don't know how many of you, if any, have used Freeform or even heard of Freeform document processing, but technically it's actually very similar to structured document processing in that it's using AI Builder, the same technology that's underpinning the structured document processing. And this means that in exactly the same way as the structured document processing, Freeform, again, currently only supports PDFs, JPEGs, and PNG files. Now, with both these last two, what you do is you train the AI with a sample set of up to 50 megabytes of images, and your PDFs have a maximum of 500 pages when you're putting together the training set. But you give it representative samples with Freeform document processing, and what you do is you then, firstly, you identify the bits of metadata you're looking to extract. So you make a list of, the metadata that you're looking for, and then you go into each example that you've given the training set, and you go through each example, and you go in and you define, okay, I found this metadata here. So in this case, we're looking at some form of rental agreement. Again, apologies around this slightly fuzzy image, but you can see here we found the landlord name and the tenant name and the property address and the start and end dates of the contract, as well as the rental amount that's due each month. And you're drawing those boxes around. In this case, we're drawing a box around the security deposit, and you're tagging it with the relevant metadata you're looking to find. So we're looking for security deposit, here it is in the file. But the difference with Freeform is it's not entirely based on area. It's not going to assume, like the structured document processing would be, that the start date's always in this location, or that the security deposit is always found in this location. It works a bit more like the unstructured document processing does. It looks at the location and it starts looking at the context, the other words around the area you've defined. And then when you find other types of rental agreements that have a different format, take, for example, this one, which is a very different structure and format. In theory, the AI has the ability to understand the context and try and find the same metadata in other formats. But this is really dependent on you getting your training sample set correct. So you've got to give it enough examples of different scenarios like this, where you can see here we're tagging the security deposit in a very different location. And once you've given it enough positive examples, in theory, that's when you unleash the AI and see what happens with the freeform processing. Now, I've not used freeform in anger myself, but the impression I get, certainly the concept that I take away from this is, I think the accuracy is going to be very much at question until you've actually really challenged it with lots and lots and lots of different types of examples, if you like. I think that you'd need to do a lot of training in order for the AI to successfully find the relevant bits of metadata for anywhere inside the file. And just to complete the conversation, I guess the freeform document processing, just like it's structured document processing, why they use the word document here, it's frustrating. Hopefully in the future we'll support documents. But anyway, just like the same way, you can't classify content, so you can't identify this is a rental agreement. It's making the assumption that it is a rental agreement going in, and also therefore you can't classify the content with a label, either retention or sensitivity label, once you've actually used the AI to process it. But Microsoft's actively working on these document processing models. They're improving them the whole time, so it wouldn't surprise me if we're going to see more languages supported. At the moment, freeform, for example, is only in English, whereas I believe unstructured supports most of the Latin languages. I think structured document at the moment supports a much wider selection of languages. But you get the idea. Microsoft is slowly improving the capabilities here, and it wouldn't surprise me if actually come back in 2 years' time and this is actually really powerful, and many of the gaps that I've identified have started to be closed. But Microsoft Syntax, I guess I've oversimplified it, because it's not just the ability to identify information and classify and extract metadata from content. It's a bigger thing in Microsoft's eyes. You see, Microsoft has started talking about this concept called content AI. And I don't know if any of you have heard of content AI before. It's It's really, I guess, think of it as a different type of technology, like a CRM or an ERP, or, you know, a database or something fundamental like a document management system. Microsoft's almost trying to suggest that there's a brand new type of technology out there that we need in our organizations called content AI, which is really going to be a whole bundle of content lifecycle management capabilities, you know, controlling or assisting with every part of the process of creating information inside Microsoft 365. So we're talking about creation right through to archival, you know, through retention, through knowledge management and reuse. And I guess this underpins Microsoft's sort of ambition in this area, where Microsoft Syntex is becoming the content AI solution inside. It's an umbrella term for multiple solutions. You know, it's encompassing various facets of the lifecycle. So these SharePoint, I say SharePoint Syntex processing models, that what used to be called SharePoint Syntex processing models, these document and image processing models are just one part of the Syntex story. Because really what we're seeing is Microsoft's already released capabilities like Content Query here, which for those of you who are familiar with Content Query, it's nothing to do with AI. It's a improvement to the search service in SharePoint Online that allows you to, when you're searching in the top ribbon of SharePoint, it gives you a drop-down box that allows you to filter your results by metadata. So it's quite a powerful extension that Microsoft's providing directly out of the box. And then you've got content assembly, which is, think of this as a super powerful mail merge capability that you can take data and automatically generate documents and fill in all of the placeholders in those documents with the metadata that you want to populate them with. So it's content creation. But there's a whole bundle of these things that haven't yet been released as well. So Microsoft's got a roadmap in Microsoft Syntex that covers a ton of other stuff, which certainly for information governance professionals, there's lots of things here to look at and think about. You know, the very fact that Microsoft's looking at archival is something that people should be aware of and start considering. Certainly not released yet, but expect things to be discussed more openly by Microsoft. They've mentioned this publicly, but to expect them to discuss in more detail over coming months what they're talking about around concepts like backup and you know, taxonomy taggers, for example. Now, many of these have nothing to do with AI. You know, to the best of my knowledge, there's no AI behind Microsoft's e-signature capability, for example. But for example, the AI summarization, which is going to, in theory, I've not seen it because it doesn't exist yet. You know, Microsoft hasn't shown any of this. They've just mentioned it. The AI summarization is, in theory, going to be some ability to automatically create an abstract, a summary of your files, so that it's giving you a digest that you can quickly read through and understand the context of a much wider file without having to read the whole information. Now, that's certainly using AI as the basis of automatically creating the abstract information. And I guess it's only once it's released that we'll actually be able to see how useful it is in reality. Now, moving on again, the next major sort of area of AI capability that I wanted to cover is Viva Topics. And I should say that both Viva Topics and also Microsoft Syntex unfortunately require additional licenses. The trainable classifiers that we mentioned originally, E5 licenses for those. The Microsoft Syntex capabilities is, well, it's going through a change in its licensing model. Let's just put it that way. It was a per user license, and I believe that Microsoft's moving to a consumption-based license around now. So yeah, it's going to be a sort of pay per page processed in the future. Gone are the days where E5 gave you everything. But Viva Topics is exactly the same. Viva Topics, last time I looked, I think it was something like $4 per user per month, in addition to the license that you happen to have for your user license. But what Viva Topics is doing is it's helping to build a knowledge network out of your existing content in Microsoft 365. It's helping to surface relevant bits of information from across your tenant and help draw those connections. So probably the best way of explaining this is to jump into something we're all familiar with, Wikipedia. We all know how to use Wikipedia. In fact, I spent far too long burying myself in Wikipedia to admit in public, but it's each page in Wikipedia. Imagine that this is a bit of content inside your tenant, a file, an email, a Teams chat, whatever it happens to be. Your knowledge is spread around your tenant in multiple different locations. And what Viva Topics is doing is sort of helping to surface that. So, for example, in this scenario, I've just hovered over the word trains there, and you can see a little card has popped up in Wikipedia with a link, a summary of the information that's stored on a different Wikipedia page. Now, really, what this is it's a digest, I guess, of the information around the train. And Microsoft has brought this same capability through Viva Topics into your content, so that you would be able to hover over links that Viva's applying, extending over and above your content, applying across the board into different parts of Microsoft 365 to surface additional relevant information about complex topics that happen to be relevant to your organization based upon what the AI has determined are the key knowledge topics in your organization. I'll probably say, yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. But let me try and explain. You've got like a network being built up. So imagine that, we start with the vehicle that we've just looking at there. And imagine how this is connected to other entities, trains, automobiles, airplanes, etc. And that all of these entities themselves are connected to other pages of information. And this is true of whether we're looking at Wikipedia, but it's also true if you think about your content inside your Microsoft 365 tenant, how there's all these chains in the connections between the content. And then some of the content that you found, some of the topics and knowledge, they've got different types. So you could probably imagine that some of these entities here are people. These could be, for example, the experts in your organization who know most about a specific topic, the architects or engineers who happen to work on a specific project. They could also be about locations. It could be, there's lots of different types of information that come together to almost surface as part of a topic. So take, for example, here, this is how it renders. This is it just happens to be that this is a intranet page, but it could be almost any part of Microsoft 365. When you hover over a keyword that has been identified as being a topic in Viva Topics, the topic card pops up containing relevant information around that topic. The people that worked against that, or the leading experts in your organization, the definition of the topic, some of the key files that contain information about that topic. All of this is permission sensitive, so you will only see the bits of the information that you have permission to see. But this link isn't a link that anyone's putting to the page. This is after the page has been created. There's no hyperlink in the page. Viva Topics is adding it after the page is loaded without you having to do anything. And this link could be in anywhere. So you can see in the context of an email or Teams chat or Word document, someone looking at that and reading the information would be able to see some of the key topics in your organization highlighted, so that when you roll the mouse across it, you get a summary of additional information that you can jump out of that file and understand more about the context of what you're actually being asked to do in that email, or understand more about what the document's actually referring to when it's talking about complex sort of internal vernacular, if you like, because every organization I work with has a different way of explaining things. And all of these topics are surfaced in a topic center. So you've almost got like a central control panel to be able to manage those topics that are relevant to your organization. Now, the AI here is much more of a black box. It's behind the scenes. You turn it on and you say, go find my knowledge topics, search across my tenant and find them for me. It's training itself. It takes a bit of time. It studies your content, and you can't really see what's going on. It's not like it tells you, here's my thinking process, or here's how I've identified the topics. Instead, I think there's a role for knowledge managers to almost work alongside the AI to start improving the outcomes that the AI is producing with regard to Viva Topics. So the first stage here is Viva Topics is not going to consistently find all of the key knowledge topics in your organization. It's inevitably going to miss one. or 2 or 3. You know, it's going to pick up a lot of the main themes and then miss some. Now you can see your taxonomy, by the way, to try and auto create topics around all of the key terms, all of the functions, let's say, you happen to have in your business classification scheme. But what you've got is the ability to manually seed as well, start creating additional topics to make sure that gaps are filled. But you've also got the ability to, excuse the bad agricultural metaphor that I'm using here, but you've got the ability to start improving those topics too. So you can imagine scenarios where the AI has given a definition of a topic that you're thinking to yourself, actually, I think I can improve that. I think I could give it a slightly better definition that's perhaps slightly more accurate. You've got the ability to tweak. You've also got the ability to perhaps the missing person. You know, actually, one of our leading experts is not being associated by the AI with this topic. Let me add them into it. Now, sometimes you're going to get topics that you really don't want to have surfaced by the AI being surfaced. Now, sometimes this will be because perhaps they're secret topics that you really don't want to be surfaced. But in other scenarios, it's perhaps because the AI has identified something that it thinks is a major part of the knowledge of the organization. You're thinking, well, it really doesn't have the significance of some of the others. You've got the ability to start removing some of those topics that you don't like as well, chopping them out so that actually you're able to focus staff upon what really is your core knowledge inside the organization. And there's different ways of setting up Viva topics, but one of the ways is to allow staff across the board to start suggesting future topics that they would like to see introduced. And you could probably imagine that getting staff on board so that they are understanding the processes, the governance, and potentially even trained to understand what, you know, how Viva Topics is working is important, certainly if you are going to delegate the ability to make recommendations around topics. Okay. Now that really was where I was going to close the conversation. You know, I was thinking to myself, yeah, you know, this presentation today, we've covered enough various different AI applications inside Microsoft 365 that already exist. And then, of course, on the 16th of March, Microsoft mentioned Copilot publicly. And I suddenly thought, oh, gosh, well, I'm going to have to mention Copilot publicly as well, because I'm sure most of you have probably heard Microsoft banging the marketing drum, because they've been speaking very widely and publicly over the last couple of weeks about Copilot. And certainly I think it's an incredibly powerful capability that is going to probably have a much larger impact upon the workplace than any of the aforementioned capabilities that I've just gone through. I hate to think what the licensing is going to look like. I haven't seen any examples yet, but we can all imagine. Let's just put it that way. But what is Copilot? For those who haven't seen, Microsoft has a substantial investment stake in OpenAI, the organization who produced ChatGPT, which, as we've all seen, is incredibly powerful. And really, I think Microsoft has internally turned around to all of their different teams and said, find some way of embedding, crowbar in if you have to, get ChatGPT into your part of Microsoft 365. And I think this is going to be huge, because, you know, look at this example that's in this screenshot that Microsoft provided us with a couple of weeks ago. You know, automatically generate content based upon the notes that I took. It's having this sort of capability is going to save people hours. This is going to massively improve efficiency across multiple organizations. And I really think that organizations not using Copilot are going to be at a big disadvantage. So yeah, this is why I'm thinking the licensing could be a bit eye-watering, but I've not seen any sign of it yet. But I think it's going to fundamentally be a fantastic technology. But you know there's a but coming. This is me. I'm not just going to sit here and go, woohoo, buy Copilot. That's not the way I do things. For me, I think we've all got to have some principles around how we use this, because I think what I've seen with ChatGPT is that sometimes it says the most remarkable things, and you can say them in the style of Shakespearean sonnets, but often, every now and again, it says something that's just not right. It doesn't do it that often. It's normally pretty accurate, but certainly when I've asked it more technical details about, way retention policies and retention labels work, it's often conflating the two topics and saying something very definitive and wrong. And I guess I'm going to break the cardinal sin here of sharing far too much text on a slide, but don't worry, I'm not going to expect you to read it. This is some of Microsoft's marketing text that they put up in support of Copilot. And there were a couple of words in this great big sea of word soup that Microsoft's marketing team thinks is compelling them or make you go out and buy the technology. There were a couple of words that jumped out to me, and they're up here. Usefully wrong. Sometimes Copilot will be right, other times usefully wrong. I love that phrasing. It's beautiful, but it's only usefully wrong if you know that it's wrong. So if you're auto-generating, the proposal that we saw in the previous image, generate a proposal from yesterday's meeting notes, and it gets it slightly wrong, perhaps it's naming the wrong stakeholder or something, it's only usefully wrong if you notice that it's wrong and you update it so that it's no longer wrong. I mean, it's certainly able to save you a huge amount of time, but it could be a lot of embarrassment if it's introducing falsehoods. And I guess I would suggest that you can only really be qualified to know if something's wrong if you could have written it in the first place. So my fundamental point with Copilot is it's going to be an incredibly useful tool if you were able to produce whatever it was that you're asking it to produce in the first place. It's certainly not going to be a tool you should trust if you are cheating your knowledge, if you like, if you're trying to build things that you would not have the ability to write in the first place. Imagine back at the beginning of this presentation, Tom Scott's code that he was writing for his YouTube channel. Imagine that code. If you weren't a developer like Tom is, how would you know that there was a bug in it? How would you know that it's wrong? Now, in most scenarios, this isn't so worrying. Copilot in Word is generating Word documents, Excel documents, etc. One of the areas that scares me a little bit is there's a Copilot for security coming out. And I don't think being usefully wrong with your security settings is something that I'd encourage. I'd suggest you need to be making sure that your security settings in Microsoft 365 have been defined by someone who understands the security settings and understands their ramifications, and not, just rely on an AI to configure these things. But I think there's also a wider point about what is truth going on here as well, because I can imagine lots of scenarios where Copilot's going to be used to generate content that perhaps people don't spot contains falsehood and rely on it. And these are records in your organization. They're going to become almost something you rely on in the future. And perhaps they're not as alarming as those deep fake videos where you can make politicians tell the truth for once, or get your favorite celebrity to say something. But these are almost adding to that background, I guess, miasma story, of slight falsehoods drifting into the narrative. And I can imagine scenarios where, certainly from an archival perspective and a historical perspective, we could start seeing minor falsehoods being introduced just because the records themselves have been auto-generated and aren't actually based on truth. Anyway, perhaps I'm making too much of a philosophical point about this, but I'm going to wrap up there. Certainly, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. I haven't been monitoring chat, so let's have a look. How are we doing?
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. That was a fascinating talk. So thank you so much. And thank you also to Cecilia, my postdoc on the LUSTRE project, who has done a lot of work, to organize this talk. So thank you both. I do have a questions for you, Rob, about Viva topics. You mentioned that it's possible to remove some topics. So I guess my question is really about the collaboration between the AI and human beings, so the AI wouldn't be, deciding on itself, there would be some input from the humans. So could you perhaps say a few words about this collaboration here?
Yeah, I think it's essential. I think just turning the AI on and letting it run by itself, you're never going to get good results. I think the best way to get the value out of Viva topics, or any AI really, is with that interaction with the human. It's, if you like, when it comes to Viva topics, the human has to act like, the ironing board. We've got to make sure that what the AI is giving us is something that we would want to reflect back out across our organization. And certainly I've seen scenarios with Viva topics where both larger organizations turn it on and end up with significant volumes of topics, many of them they would never have considered to be relevant for them as an organization. And certainly smaller organizations turn it on and the AI doesn't have enough information to really generate topics. So they end up seeding an awful lot of the topics themselves. So I think half the value in Viva topics is in the way that the topic cards are overlaid across Microsoft 365. The AI is a benefit, if you like, that makes it easier to start collating things. But again, the biggest problem I see with Viva topics is that many people see it as a replacement for a good information architecture. And it very much isn't. You need to have a good information architecture in place, good metadata, good structure, good navigation paths, if people are going to be able to find the content. Viva topics really it's an additional veneer, an additional layer over the top of the information architecture that derives more value from your existing content. It's not something to, it's certainly not an excuse to sit there and think, my content's in a mess. I don't have to do anything to tidy it up now. I'll just leave it for another few years because AI will sort it.
Great, thank you so much, Rob. So we have a few questions in the chat. Just to let you know, we are going to finish on time, so in 5 minutes, but we do have time for a few questions. So Abigail has a question about training data, target data, and policies. So she wants to know if this data is kept within the organization or are the data included in Microsoft tools. So it's about the location of the data.
I haven't looked into all scenarios where the data is stored and kept in all of these different training sets, but certainly you create the training sets inside your tenant. You might, in some scenarios, want to consider setting up a separate tenant to sort of undertake testing in, especially if you're going to unleash things. But very, very often when you're doing these sort of broad scale classification capabilities, you end up needing so much content to be transferred to a different location that it's better to keep it inside your tenant. In terms of data residency, I've not checked entirely whether Microsoft's doing anything sort of slightly dubious in terms of where it's storing it, but my understanding is it should all be stored within the same region as your tenant. So there might, I think Microsoft's trying, they recognize that information governance dictates that, and I believe that in most scenarios now they're trying to align their tenants to keep your data in the region where your tenant should be having its data stored.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rob. Another question from Abigail about trying to negotiate with our organization, trying to get them to pay for those commercial tools that might be quite expensive, especially for our organizations in the public sector. Do you have perhaps some strategies to share here?
It's a real struggle because let's face it, everyone's struggling with budget at the moment, and I guess it really depends upon the organizational need. So it's like everything else, you're building up a business case in order to see if it's justified. Now, I think it's probably one of the biggest Achilles heels of many of these technologies that because they're having to because Microsoft's decided to give them their own license fee, it's hard to justify when the price of Microsoft 365 is already pretty steep for many organizations to pay for. Paying even more for these capabilities is pretty hard to justify. I wish I had some eureka, hey, it's worth it for these moments, but it's very much, I think, it's really down to the uniqueness of your scenario. So as an organization, if you've got lots of, say, let's say you've got 20,000 files or more that all have a very consistent type of information. I don't know, you might be, I'm trying to think of a scenario. You might be the House of Commons and you're producing Hansard, for example, and it's all got a really standard structure, and I'm making up a silly scenario. You might be a law firm and you're producing wills, and you've got 50,000 wills or something that all have a very consistent structure. In those sorts of scenarios, it's potentially, you could more easily make a case for the value of, say, something like Microsoft Syntax coming in to automatically extract metadata from them so you know what you've got. In scenarios where, let's say, you are a government body with lots of different mixed unstructured documents, it's harder to make that business case. But if you've got a very large digital heap and you know there's information in there, you're really down to the standard sort of carrot and stick approaches of saying, hey, we've got to be compliant with the Public Record Act, for example. So each organization has to make their own business case. And I really wish there was some genius answer to the question that I could give you.
Great, thank you. And finally, one final question from Michael about trainable classifiers. Trainable classifiers, can they take metadata into account? So, for example, document creator, filing location, etc.
Not that I've seen, no. Certainly, I don't believe so. It would be really useful if we could actually take that sort of metadata into account. They are. You know, you're very much just considering the processing of the entire file. Now, I don't know if the AI underpinning is taking into metadata and location into account. It might well do as part of its algorithm. Certainly, it's more of a black box when it comes to the actual algorithm. But what you're really doing is you are marking the whole file as yes, you are. This meets the seed. You know, this is a good positive example, or no, you've gone wrong here. So it wouldn't surprise me if Microsoft's making use of all of those levers like location and metadata as part of its algorithm, but they've certainly not told us one way or not. Well, unless I've misread it somewhere. I've not seen them having told us that it is taking that into account.
Great, thank you so much, Rob. So thanks again for a great talk. Thank you for answering all those questions very generously. And thank you everyone for joining the talk. It was good to see so many attendees, really. So the next step for us is to put the recording on our website. So keep an eye on our website, or join our mailing list if you haven't done so already. But really have a great day. Enjoy the Easter break and hopefully see you soon. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye all.